She hadn't planned on stopping, but something in the rain told her to look. Thunder rolled in the distance, rumbling over the empty stretch of road as Claire Whitmore gripped the steering wheel tighter, squinting through the streaks of rain that battered her windshield. The town sign, Marion, population 2,117, slipped past, half buried behind wild spring vines. She hadn't seen it in years, but even in the gray haze, the shape was familiar. Every mile closer had felt heavier, as if the tires pressed not only against wet asphalt, but over the cracked timeline of her own life. Claire's wipers could barely keep up. Her rental car, borrowed for this one reluctant trip, smelled of new leather and corporate air freshener, a world away from the place she was heading. She caught a glimpse of her own eyes in the rear view, tired, older than she remembered, ringed with sleepless shadows. She told herself she'd only come back to sign a few papers. Just business, she whispered, as the family lawyer had put it on the phone. Sell the property, close the last page. No reason to look back. But the storm had other plans. As she rounded a bend, headlights swept across the trees. For just a second, a shape flashed in the ditch. Claire's foot slammed the brake. The car fishtailed, skidding over a puddle before settling with a shudder on the gravel shoulder. Her heart thumped. She almost laughed at herself. Nerves, that's all. But then she saw it again. A dark shape huddled beneath the lowest boughs of an old pine. Just beyond the guardrail, a dog. Not just any stray. The markings, even blurred by rain, were unmistakable. Black and tan, ears too large, tail curled tightly around his soaked body. And his eyes, even from the road, seemed to glint with something like recognition. She froze. It couldn't be. Claire threw open the door and stepped into the rain. Icy water soaked through her thin sneakers instantly, and the wind whipped her hair around her face. Her chest squeezed as she called out, barely able to hear her own voice over the storm. The dog didn't move, only watched her. Wary and trembling, she crossed the ditch, mud sucking at her feet, until she was close enough to kneel beside him. Up close, she could see the dog was older, his coat matted and thin. His ribs pressed against his skin, and his breathing was shallow. But when she reached out, her hands shaking, he didn't flinch. He looked up, straight into her eyes. That's when she knew. Scout? The name tumbled out of her, almost choked by disbelief. It had been so many years since she'd said it out loud. She half expected the world to swallow her for daring. But at the sound, the dog's ears pricked. His tail thudded once, weakly, in the mud. He gave a soft, raspy whine. Not a greeting? Not yet. Just a question. A memory. Claire's throat burned. She remembered Scout as a puppy, chasing her through the fields behind her parents' house, leaping for sticks taller than he was. She remembered the last day she saw him, after the accident, when everything turned to static. They told her he'd run away. She'd believed it, because anything else would have been too hard. Now she shrugged off her coat and wrapped it around his trembling body. He was cold to the touch, but as she lifted him, awkwardly, gently, careful not to hurt his old bones, he pressed his head against her chest. She staggered back to the car, the rain beating down harder with every step. Inside, the world went silent for a moment, just the two of them and the soft ticking of Scout's breath. Claire set him on the back seat, wrapped in her coat, and hesitated. She should take him to a vet. That was the right thing to do. But something in the way Scout watched her, unblinking and full of exhausted trust, made her pause. Her family home wasn't far, just 5 more minutes down the road. It had been empty for years, left to dust and silence, but it was still theirs. It was still his, too. Claire turned the key. Instead of heading into town, she pulled off the main road and followed the winding lane she knew by heart, each turn lined with drooping oaks and wild daisies struggling through gravel. The old house appeared through the sheets of rain, windows dark, porch sagging. She parked beneath the willow tree and hurried inside, Scout tucked in her arms like the fragile, precious secret he was. She made a nest of blankets on the living room rug, close to the old fireplace. Scout curled into it, letting out a long, shuddering sigh. His eyes followed her every movement, silent, watchful, afraid to hope. Claire sat beside him as thunder rattled the windows, feeling the ghosts of every lost year settle around them. That night, neither of them slept. Scout's breath was rough and shallow, his body twitching in uneasy dreams. Claire sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the rain drip from the cracked ceiling, listening for any change in his breathing. She whispered stories she hadn't told in years, about summers by the lake, about secret trails in the woods, about a little girl and her wild, loyal friend. And as the first pale light crept through the curtains, she realized she was afraid to close her eyes, not because of what she might dream, but because she didn't want to miss a single moment with him. Somehow, impossibly, Scout had waited for her. The wind howled all night, rattling the loose shutters and filling the Whitmore house with a chorus of old ghosts. Claire dozed in and out of restless sleep, her back pressed against the wall, her eyes always drifting back to the pile of blankets where Scout lay curled unmoving. The rain softened before dawn, but inside the old house, time seemed to pause, trapping her in a world half made of memory. She checked Scout's breathing, still shallow but steadier now, as if the warmth and the familiarity of this broken-down living room offered some comfort. His fur was still damp despite her efforts, and she gently dried him with an old towel she found in a forgotten hallway closet, the fabric stiff with age and dust. Each time she touched him, Scout's tail gave a slow, hesitant thump against the rug. "You remember this place, don't you?" she whispered, unable to help herself. The words echoed, a ripple through the heavy air. Scout gazed up at her, the old intelligence and loyalty burning through the weariness in his eyes. Claire knew she should call a vet, but her phone sat untouched on the kitchen counter. Some stubborn part of her, an instinct she couldn't explain, told her Scout belonged here, at least for now. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe she just wasn't ready to let anyone else take him from her again. She made tea with stale bags from the back of a cabinet, the water tinged with rust but hot enough to chase away the chill in her bones. She sat beside Scout on the floor, holding the mug between her palms, steam curling around her face. He watched every move, the rise and fall of her hands, the tilt of her head. When she leaned in, he rested his nose on her knee. They watched the world brighten through the rain-streaked window, listening to the distant sound of a train whistle, faint, familiar, a reminder that life outside these walls continued at its own indifferent pace. In the silence, Claire could almost believe nothing had changed, that her family would walk in at any moment, laughing, her mother's voice rising above the chaos. But it was only her and Scout now. Two survivors, battered by storms, neither of them had chosen. As the sun climbed higher, Claire forced herself to move. She rummaged through the kitchen for food, scraping together a breakfast of stale crackers and canned soup, pouring water into a chipped bowl for Scout. He sniffed it, then slowly lapped at the water, tongue working carefully as if the act itself was exhausting. Watching him struggle, Claire's guilt twisted inside her. She should do more. She should help him, really help him. But where would she go? The nearest vet was miles away, and she wasn't ready to leave this house. Not yet. Not after so long. Besides, she told herself, Scout needed to rest. She would give him a day. Just one day to be safe, to belong. Later, she found herself wandering the halls of her childhood, pausing at closed doors and faded photos. The house felt haunted by joy as much as by loss. She drifted back to the living room, dropping to her knees beside Scout again, whispering stories into the heavy, dust-filled air. "You used to chase rabbits out by the orchard," she said, her voice cracking. "Remember? You'd come back covered in mud, tail wagging like you'd just won a prize." Scout's ears twitched. He shifted closer, sighing deeply, as if the memory itself offered strength. As afternoon stretched into evening, a storm of doubt battered Claire's mind. What if Scout was in pain? What if waiting here was the wrong choice? She found herself checking his collar, an old, battered thing, leather-worn smooth by years. Her fingers traced the etched metal tag, heart pounding as she noticed something she'd missed before. A piece of paper, folded small and tight, tucked into a hidden pocket in the collar. She tugged it free, hands shaking. The paper was yellowed and brittle, nearly falling apart as she unfolded it. A photograph, blurred at the edges but unmistakable. A young Claire, grinning wildly, her arms wrapped around a smaller, younger Scout, both of them muddy and breathless on the banks of the lake behind the house. Her breath caught. The date on the back, written in her mother's neat, looping script, was the last summer before the accident. She pressed the photo to her chest, eyes burning. Scout hadn't forgotten her. He'd carried this proof with him through every lonely year. A sudden burst of thunder shook the house, snapping Claire out of her reverie. Scout jerked awake, eyes wide, body tensed. Claire reached out, smoothing his fur, whispering his name until he settled again. That night, as dusk fell and the wind faded to a gentle breeze, Claire wrapped Scout in every blanket she could find, curling up beside him on the living room floor. She played soft music from her phone, old songs her mother loved. A quiet soundtrack for the first night that felt, in some way, like coming home. Scout watched her, his breathing still ragged, but his eyes no longer clouded with fear. For the first time since she'd found him, Claire saw the flicker of something familiar in his gaze, a spark of hope, or maybe just the old, stubborn loyalty that had always set him apart. She closed her eyes, listening to the house settle around them. Outside, the rain eased, and somewhere, a night bird sang. No matter what tomorrow brought, Claire promised herself she would fight for Scout. She would give him peace. She would give him the home he'd waited for all these years. And as she drifted into sleep, Scout pressed his nose against her hand, holding her there with the silent promise only a dog can make. The next morning, sunlight crept through cracks in the faded curtains, casting narrow lines across the living room. Claire stirred before she was ready, her neck stiff from sleeping on the floor, a dull ache pulsing behind her eyes. For a moment she didn't move, afraid she'd imagined the entire night. The storm, the rescue, Scout's fragile warmth pressed against her side. But then she heard it, the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing, so close. She opened her eyes and found Scout curled up in the nest of blankets, chin resting on his paws. His gaze was fixed on her, gentle but unblinking, as if he'd kept watch the whole night. Morning, old friend," Claire murmured, voice scratchy from sleep. She stretched out a hand. Scout lifted his head, ears pricking up. There was something different in his eyes. Alertness, recognition. His tail gave a slow, deliberate thump. She reached for her phone and, after hesitating, snapped a quick photo. Not to post, not to share, just for herself. Proof that this moment was real. Her stomach grumbled. In the kitchen, she scrounged up another can of soup, heating it on the rusty stove. For Scout, she found some leftover chicken from her travel cooler, dicing it into tiny pieces and setting them in his bowl. He sniffed, tongue flicking out, and, after a pause, ate. Each bite seemed to revive him, and Claire watched every mouthful like a nurse with a patient on the brink. With the rain finally gone, she decided to open the front door and let in the fresh, cool air. The yard was wild with overgrown grass, thick with the scent of wet earth and last night's storm. Scout watched her carefully, then slowly pushed himself up, his legs trembling beneath him. He took a step, then another, as if testing the floorboards, the blankets, even his own muscles. Claire opened the door wider, and for a brief, suspended moment, she thought Scout might bolt, flee into the wild, vanish again into some memory of freedom or fear. But he only hesitated, eyes flicking from the open world outside to her face. "Go on, buddy," she coaxed, voice soft, heart thudding. "Just the porch." Scout moved with the cautious grace of an old soldier. He stepped out until I had sunlight dappling his back. and sniffed the air, tail twitching. The air hummed with bird song and the scent of pine needles. For a moment he just stood there, soaking it in. Claire joined him, standing beside her childhood friend on the warped wooden steps. As they sat together, a flood of memories broke open inside her, scenes from a life she'd tried so hard to forget. Summers of laughter and skinned knees, of chasing fireflies and diving into the lake, Scout always at her heels, bounding with a joy that knew no limits. She remembered rainy afternoons like this one, building forts from sofa cushions while thunder shook the windows, Scout huddled close as if protecting her from every rumble. But memory was never just sweet, it was jagged too. The accident, the sharp divide between before and after, her father's silence, her mother's tears, and the empty feeling when they told her Scout was gone. She remembered screaming into her pillow, swearing she would find him, even as everyone gently said to let go. That grief, she realized, had never healed. She'd only learned to step around it year after year. Scout, sensing her change in mood, nudged her with his nose, drawing her back to the present. Claire smiled, blinking fast. "You never really left, did you?" she whispered. "You waited." They spent the morning wandering the house. Claire moved from room to room, Scout shadowing her every step. In the den, she found a stack of old photos. Her parents at a 4th of July barbecue. Her younger self, gap-toothed and wild, hugging Scout so tightly he looked alarmed. The images made her ache and laugh at once. In the hallway, she paused at a low shelf. Scout's old spot. There, tucked behind a dusty vase, she found his first rubber ball, cracked and faded. She rolled it toward him. Scout pawed at it, uncertain, then pressed it gently to his muzzle as if savoring the scent of another life. Later, as they sat together by the cold fireplace, Claire remembered the folded photo she'd found in Scout's collar the night before. She took it out and studied it in the golden morning light. The edges were worn, but the image was clear enough. Her, as a child, and Scout, both of them covered in mud, wild with laughter. Her mother's handwriting on the back. "Best friends, July 12th. Claire turned the collar over in her hands, searching for answers. Why had Scout run that day? Or had he? Had he ever truly left? Or had he been taken from her? Hidden away? Why would her family keep that from her? Lost in thought, she almost missed the change in Scout. His tail, weak but determined, thudded a steady beat against the floor. When she met his gaze, she really saw, the spark of recognition. Scout's eyes were clear and focused, filled with a loyalty so deep it made her heart ache. For the first time since her return, Claire felt something inside her start to heal. Maybe the pieces of her old life weren't as lost as she'd believed. Maybe, with Scout at her side, she could finally face the truth, whatever it might be. The day wore on, sunlight slowly filling every crack and shadow of the house. Claire opened every window, letting in fresh air and the distant sounds of children playing somewhere down the street. She made a promise, silently, fiercely, to discover what had really happened all those years ago. She owed it to Scout. She owed it to herself. That evening, as the sun set behind the lake and painted the sky in streaks of gold and lavender, Claire sat beside Scout and whispered, "We're not done yet. You and me?" Scout's answer was a gentle nudge, a slow wag of his tired tail. The past wasn't finished with them, but neither were they finished with the past. Claire barely slept that night. The house was quieter, filled with the sort of silence that comes after a confession, but her mind churned restlessly. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd missed something, some piece of the puzzle that would explain everything. Scout's return, the photograph in his collar, the strange emptiness in the rooms where her family used to laugh. All of it felt tangled together, heavy and urgent. When dawn broke, she was already at the kitchen table, a mug of instant coffee cooling in her hands. Scout lay curled at her feet, his breathing easier, his eyes following her every movement. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, catching dust motes that spun lazily in the air. Claire turned her attention to Scout's old collar and the photograph once more. Why would anyone, her family, her uncle, anyone, let her believe Scout had simply run away? Why was the truth hidden in a crumpled piece of paper tucked close to his heart? Her thoughts circled back to the accident. She remembered the chaos, ambulance lights, neighbors whispering, her Uncle Marcus holding her shoulders as she sobbed for her parents and begged for Scout. Her phone buzzed on the counter, shattering her reverie. It was a text from the family lawyer, a reminder about her afternoon meeting at the courthouse, a polite check-in to see if she'd arrived safely in town. She glanced at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply button, but the urge to search for answers overwhelmed her. The paperwork could wait. After feeding Scout, she pulled on a sweater and set out for town, leaving him to doze on the rug. The streets of Marion looked smaller than she remembered, but they pulsed with the rhythm of ordinary life. Kids riding bikes, old men sipping coffee outside the diner, the thud of a basketball from the schoolyard. Everything was the same. Yet she felt like an outsider, a ghost drifting among people who'd managed to keep moving forward. She headed for the animal shelter first. The place was different from when she was a child, brighter, freshly painted, the air thick with the hopeful chaos of barking dogs and yowling cats. Behind the counter stood a woman with short, silver hair and sharp blue eyes. Dana Keene, her name tag read. Claire introduced herself, explaining about Scout and his sudden, miraculous return. As she spoke, Dana's expression shifted from polite curiosity to something softer, a glimmer of recognition, maybe even relief. Scout, Dana said quietly, as if the name was a secret too heavy to speak aloud. He was here a long time. I always wondered if you'd come back looking for him. Claire's heart pounded. What do you mean? I thought he was lost. My uncle, he told me Scout ran away after the accident. Dana shook her head, lips pressed thin. He didn't run. He was brought in. Your uncle brought him. Said the family couldn't handle a dog right now, not with everything going on. I was new back then, but even I could tell Scout was different. He never settled, wouldn't eat, wouldn't play with the other dogs, and it was like he was waiting for someone. The admission stung. Claire tried to hide the tremor in her voice. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why would my uncle lie? Dana sighed. I can't answer for him, but I can tell you this. I tried to get Scout adopted, but he refused to leave. He'd escape every run, wait by the door, howl all night. He bit a couple of folks, snapped at the staff. We should have sent him to another shelter, maybe even, well, but I couldn't do it. I started sneaking him into my office at night, taking him home on weekends. I knew he was waiting for you. And I guess, in the end, he was right. Claire was stunned, tears welling in her eyes. All these years, Scout had been so close, held in limbo by her uncle's decision and Dana's quiet rebellion. I have to talk to Marcus, she said, her voice low and fierce. Dana placed a gentle hand on her arm. Be careful, Claire. The past has a way of protecting itself. Some folks in this town, well, not everyone likes old wounds opened. Claire nodded, determination solidifying inside her. Before she left, Dana disappeared into a back room and returned with Scout's old medical records, notes, photos, even a faded tennis ball he'd once claimed as his own. Armed with this proof, Claire walked the town in a daze. Every block held memories. A scar on her knee from the playground, the bench where her father taught her to tie her shoes, the creek where she'd first taught Scout to swim. Each step made her realize how much she'd missed, how much she'd lost in the silence that followed her family's tragedy. At noon, she found herself standing outside her Uncle Marcus's hardware store. The bell over the door chimed as she stepped inside. Marcus looked up from the counter, surprised, then wary. He was older, gray at the temples, but his posture was the same. Shoulders square, eyes hard. Claire, he greeted her, guarded. Didn't expect to see you so soon. She held out the photo, her hands trembling. Why did you give him away, Marcus? Why didn't you tell me? A long pause stretched between them. Marcus's gaze dropped to the photo, then to the floor. It wasn't my decision to make. You needed to heal. You needed to move on. Yeah, I thought Scout would hold you back. Claire's anger flared. He was family. You had no right. Marcus straightened, a pain flickering across his face. I'm sorry, Claire. I did what I thought was best. Maybe I was wrong. Claire stood there, the silence vibrating with words unspoken. She knew this wasn't the end of it, not by a long shot. The truth was deeper, messier. She could feel it. She left the store with her fists clenched and her heart pounding. Scout was waiting for her, always had been, and now, for the first time in years, Claire was ready to chase every last answer, no matter what it cost. The air in Marion felt heavier as Claire left her uncle's store, the truth pressing on her chest. She walked with quick, angry steps back toward the old Whitmore house. The sidewalk blurred at the edges as tears threatened. She couldn't tell if she was angrier at Marcus for what he'd done, or at herself for not questioning the story all these years. Either way, there was no turning back. She had started down a road she couldn't abandon, not with Scout waiting for her, not with the ache in her heart refusing to fade. She arrived home to find Scout awake, lying near the screen door. He struggled to his feet, tail lifting weakly. Claire dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him. For a long time, she just breathed in his scent, letting the feel of his fur ground her. He was thin, older, but he was here, living proof that love, even when denied, never truly disappeared. She sat on the porch steps, Scout's head in her lap, watching the late afternoon sun slip through the pines. Her mind raced through every detail of her conversation with Marcus. His words echoed that, "I thought Scout would hold you back." Was it possible? He really believed that? Or was there more to the story? Another layer beneath the surface. Something he couldn't admit. The past felt like a locked room, and she was only now finding the key. Claire called Marcus that evening, demanding to see him again. There was no avoiding it anymore. The only way forward was through the pain and secrets that had festered for so long. He met her at the old community center, a place that smelled of must and sawdust, its walls lined with faded photos of town fairs and Little League teams. Marcus waited by a window, arms crossed, his face drawn with a fatigue she hadn't noticed before. Outside, a summer storm was building. The wind rattled the panes, thunder grumbled far away. She wasted no time. "I need to know everything. No more half-truths. Why did you really give Scout away? And why lie to me all these years?" Marcus's jaw tensed. He glanced away, as if measuring the storm clouds for answers. After the accident? After your parents died? I was lost, Claire. You were just a kid. I was barely holding things together. Scout, he kept going to your room, whining, scratching at the door. I thought he was making it worse for you. Every time you cried, he'd push up against you, howl at night. I really thought you'd heal faster if he was gone. Claire swallowed hard, anger and sorrow warring inside her. But you didn't give me the choice. You just took him. He nodded, guilt etched in every line of his face. I was wrong. I see that now. I didn't know how to help you. I barely knew how to help myself. They sat in silence, the only sound the wind lashing against the siding, but Claire couldn't shake the sense that he was still hiding something. Why didn't you tell me Scout was at the shelter? Why keep him from me after all these years? What was really going on that night? The night of the accident. Marcus flinched, his eyes flickering. He hesitated, then pulled something from his jacket, a yellowed envelope, edges worn thin. He slid it across the table to her. "Read it," he said, voice rough. "Then you'll understand." With trembling fingers, Claire opened the envelope. Inside was a police report, nearly illegible from age, and a handwritten note in her father's bold, hurried script. She read it twice, her heart pounding in her ears. It described the night of the accident, a frantic warning call her father had placed to Marcus. There'd been an argument at the house, not just with her parents, but with her father's business partner, Leonard Fry. Scout, it said, had barked and blocked the back door, refusing to let anyone leave. Her parents had been distracted, rushing to get out and settle things, when the car crashed on the rain-slick road. Claire stared at Marcus. "You knew something else happened that night, didn't you? It wasn't just an accident." Marcus's shoulders sagged. "I tried to protect you, Claire. Your father was about to expose something at the company, something Leonard was doing with the books. That night, your dad confronted him. Things got ugly. Scout tried to warn them, tried to keep them inside. I didn't want you to blame anyone. I thought you needed a clean break. I thought I was saving you from more pain." Tears finally fell, burning hot and silent. Claire pressed her hand to her mouth. The truth was bitter and freeing at once. All these years she'd blamed herself, wondered what she'd missed, why she'd lost so much at once. Now, finally, she could see the fractured pieces for what they were. She had been a child, swept up in adult chaos, the ones who should have protected her, blinded by fear and pride. Marcus reached across the table, his hand trembling. "I'm sorry, Claire. Truly, I can't fix what I did. But I can help you set things right now." She took a shaky breath, nodding. "Then help me. All of it. No more lies." As she stood to leave, the storm finally broke, rain lashing the windows in wild, cleansing sheets. Claire walked out into the downpour, letting the water soak her to the bone. She was done running from the past. Back at the house, she found Scout waiting, eyes bright despite the years. She knelt and hugged him close, pressing her face into his fur, the promise of truth and justice burning in her heart. Tomorrow, she would face Leonard Fry. Tomorrow she would fight for her family, for Scout, and for herself. For the first time in years, she felt whole. The next morning dawned gray and humid, with a heavy mist clinging to the grass, and the scent of wet earth seeping through every crack of the old house. Claire awoke before sunrise, her mind heavy with the revelations from Marcus. She sat quietly on the edge of the sofa, watching Scout as he slept, each breath a fragile miracle. His ears flicked, sensing her gaze, and he opened his eyes, meeting her with the same trust that had never faltered. As she made coffee, she replayed the conversation in the community center again and again. Her father's warning, Leonard Fry's name, the truth Marcus had kept hidden. Every detail sharpened her resolve. She owed it to her parents, to Scout, and to herself to finish what her father had started. By noon, Claire found herself in town, her steps carrying her to the courthouse. The building loomed over the main street, its columns streaked with rain, a relic of a more honest time. She entered with her shoulders squared, clutching the envelope Marcus had given her. The receptionist barely glanced up as Claire asked for the sheriff, but a hint of surprise flashed in the woman's eyes when she saw the Whitmore name. While she waited in the narrow hallway, Claire's nerves prickled. She caught sight of Leonard Fry's photo, smiling in the Last Town newsletter, shaking hands at a ribbon cutting, polished and untouchable. The sight made her stomach twist. He'd been a shadow in the background of her childhood, always just out of focus. Now she saw him clearly, a thread connecting tragedy to corruption. Sheriff Danvers, a barrel-chested man with a kind but wary face, greeted her in his cramped office. He listened quietly as Claire laid out the evidence. Her father's note, the old police report, the stories Marcus had finally confessed. She explained how Scout had tried to stop her parents from leaving the night of the accident, how the argument with Fry had pushed everything to a breaking point. Danvers nodded slowly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "We suspected something years back, but with your parents gone and Marcus refusing to talk, there was nothing concrete. Leonard covered his tracks well. People liked him. He made sure of it." Claire's hands clenched in her lap. "But now you have proof. You can reopen the case." He studied her, his eyes softening. "We can look into it, Claire, but reopening a case this old, with half the witnesses dead or gone, and It won't be easy. Leonard's got friends, and Marcus, well, if he was involved in covering things up, there'll be fallout. I don't care about the fallout, Claire said, her voice trembling but fierce. I want the truth. I want justice for my parents, for Scout, for everyone who was hurt. Danvers nodded. All right. I'll need Marcus's statement. And I want to speak to Dana Keene, too, the shelter worker. If what you say is true, she risked her job to protect Scout and keep your family's secrets safe. Claire's throat tightened. Dana did more than anyone. If you have to go after Marcus, promise me you'll protect her. She saved Scout. She kept a piece of my family alive. The sheriff hesitated, then gave her a solemn nod. I'll do what I can. By the time Claire left the courthouse, a new storm was rolling in, thunder growling on the horizon. She found her thoughts drifting to Scout, his loyalty, his warnings on the night of the accident. Dogs always knew. They sensed danger before anyone else. He'd tried to save them all, and in a way, he had. He'd saved her from a life built on lies. That afternoon, Claire returned to the shelter. She found Dana in the outdoor run, tossing a ball for a young Labrador mix. When Dana saw her, she smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing. Any luck? Donna asked, her voice gentle. Claire nodded, holding up the folder of documents. They're reopening the case. The sheriff wants to talk to you about Scout, about what you did for him. I'm sorry, I know this puts you at risk. Dana shrugged, a wry smile tugging at her lips. After all these years, I think I'm ready to tell the truth. Besides, Scout was always a good judge of character. If he trusted you, that was enough for me. They sat together on a low bench, watching the dogs play, the air heavy with secrets and hope. Claire told Dana everything, about Marcus's confession, about her father's suspicions, about Leonard Fry's threats. With every word, Dana's resolve hardened. I'll tell the sheriff what I know, she said. I'll protect Scout's legacy. And yours. That evening, as the rain began to fall in earnest, Claire drove home, her chest lighter than it had been in years. But the feeling of victory was bittersweet. Scout's steps were slower that night, his breathing labored. He ate only a few bites of boiled chicken before curling up by the fireplace, his gaze fixed on the shadows dancing across the walls. Claire lay beside him, one hand resting gently on his side. She whispered the stories of their childhood adventures, the good days and the bad. Scout's ears twitched as she spoke, his tail giving a faint wag. As thunder rattled the windows, Claire promised herself, that she would see this through. She would clear her father's name. She would make the town remember the dog who waited, who protected, who refused to forget. Scout's eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. For the first time since she returned, Claire felt a sense of peace settle over them, a fragile, precious moment in the heart of the storm. Tomorrow, the world would change, but tonight, they had each other. The world outside Claire's window was painted with streaks of rain and pale morning light. Scout lay sleeping beside her, his body curled in a tight circle, breathing slow but steady. The evidence and confessions gathered over the last few days swirled in Claire's mind, a storm of memory and truth threatening to break open the town's long-protected secrets. She stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her family's past, the years of longing, and the hope for justice all pressing against her heart. Just after sunrise, her phone vibrated. A message from Sheriff Danvers. Come to my office. We're moving forward. Claire's pulse quickened. She let Scout sleep, leaving him wrapped in an old flannel blanket, and hurried into the soft drizzle. As she drove into town, she saw neighbors on their porches, people she'd known as a child, all unaware that the world around them was about to change. Inside the sheriff's station, Danvers sat at his desk, face set in determination. Across from him, Marcus looked ashen but resolute, hands clasped tight. Dana Keene was there too, eyes shining with equal parts anxiety and relief. Claire greeted them all, her words soft but full of gratitude. She could see how hard it had been for Marcus to agree to this, but she respected his willingness to face the truth. Danvers cleared his throat and began. Based on Marcus's statement and the evidence Claire brought in, we've reopened the investigation into your parents' deaths and the Whitmore family business. Marcus has agreed to testify, and Dana has corroborated the details about Scout and the aftermath. Dana handed over records she'd kept in secret, documents about Scout's intake, incident reports about his escape attempts, even a letter Marcus had sent instructing the shelter not to contact Claire. It was a paper trail of pain and secrecy, but also one of resilience and love. As Danvers organized the evidence, the mood in the room grew tense. Claire's heart hammered. She thought about everything Scout had endured, years of waiting, the pain of separation, the silent hope that one day she would return. In his loyalty, he had become more than just a pet. He was a living testament to the love her family had lost and the courage she'd found to seek the truth. Danvers made the next move. He drove out to Leonard Fry's estate, accompanied by deputies and Marcus, who carried with him his own burden of guilt and the resolve to finally make things right. Claire waited anxiously, pacing the halls of the sheriff's office, wringing her hands, her thoughts flickering between the hope for justice and the worry for Scout's declining health. Hours passed. Rain battered the windows, thunder low and steady. When Danvers returned, his face was grave but triumphant. Leonard Fry had been arrested, his denials falling apart under the weight of Marcus's testimony and the evidence in the police report. Years of corruption, embezzlement, fraud, cover-ups had come spilling out. The accident that killed Claire's parents was finally recognized not as random tragedy, but as the fallout of betrayal and greed. For the first time since she was a child, Claire felt the foundation of her world begin to shift, not in collapse, but in renewal. The truth was ugly, but it was also liberating. In the days that followed, word spread across Marion. Some people whispered about scandal and shame, but many reached out with compassion, remembering the Whitmores for their kindness, their honesty, and the daughter who had come home to set things right. Claire accepted condolences with a quiet grace, focusing her energy on Scout and on the people who'd helped her, Marcus, Dana, Sheriff Danvers. Meanwhile, Scout's health continued to decline. Some days he seemed to rally, tail thumping when she brought him his favorite treat or when she sat and read by the fireplace. Other days, he slept for hours, his breathing shallow, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. Claire spent every moment she could at his side, brushing his fur, whispering old stories, letting him know he was safe, loved, and home. One evening, Marcus came by with a bag of Scout's favorite treats and a photo album he'd found buried in his attic. He sat quietly beside Claire and Scout, flipping through the pages. Birthday parties, lake trips, ordinary afternoons that now felt like treasure. For the first time, Marcus let himself cry, his grief mingling with Claire's, their forgiveness silent but absolute. Dana visited too, bringing flowers and homemade soup. She knelt beside Scout, scratching his ears and telling him he'd always been her favorite. The stubborn one, the brave one, the one who waited. The house, once hollow with loss, began to fill with the warmth of healing. Amidst all this, Sheriff Danvers kept his word. When Marcus's cooperation meant he might face legal consequences, Danvers negotiated a deal. Marcus's testimony would be enough to convict Fry, and in exchange, Dana and the shelter would be protected. Justice would be served, but mercy too. Scout spent his days resting in sunbeams, watching the world through the front window, tail twitching when neighborhood children ran by. Claire took him for slow walks down the old lane, stopping by the willow where he'd first waited for her return. They sat together on the porch, breathing in the peace that had been so long in coming. In every gesture, in every word spoken and unspoken, the past was being put to rest. Not forgotten, but accepted. Marion would remember the Whitmores, the tragedy, and the dog who waited. Claire would remember it all. But she would also remember the healing that followed. As the days grew shorter and the air cooler, Claire knew Scout's time was coming to an end. But she was ready. Justice at last had begun to bloom. A gentle autumn settled over Marion, wrapping the small town in gold and bronze. The air turned crisp, the days shortened, and every sunset glowed like an ember through the old oaks. For Claire and Scout, time felt precious, each hour together sharp and bittersweet, a slow, beautiful letting go. Scout grew weaker with every passing day. His steps were shorter, his appetite faded, and he slept longer in the warm patches of sunlight that spilled across the living room floor. Yet his eyes still found Claire's each morning, bright with a stubborn spark, as if he was determined to stay just a little longer, long enough to see her truly whole again. Claire filled the days with small rituals of love. She carried Scout outside every morning, feeling his heart flutter against her arms, and laid him gently on the porch so he could watch the squirrels race along the fence. She brushed his coat with slow, careful strokes, humming lullabies from her childhood, her voice barely above a whisper. Each moment was a memory being made and preserved, a promise that he would never be forgotten. One afternoon, as leaves fell in gentle spirals across the yard, Claire decided to take Scout to the lake. It was the place where her best memories lived. Summer picnics with her parents, muddy adventures, the wild laughter of a girl, and her fearless, loyal pup. Then she bundled Scout in a blanket, gently set him in the back seat of her car, and drove with the windows cracked just enough for the scents of pine and earth to drift in. The lake shimmered in the late-day sun, its surface still and glassy. Claire laid a thick quilt on the grass beneath their favorite willow tree and lifted Scout onto it, cradling him as if he were a child. He sniffed the air, ears twitching. For a while, they simply sat, her hand resting on his back, his gaze fixed on the ripples lapping at the shore. Memories drifted between them. Claire remembered wading into the water, Scout splashing after her, barking with pure delight. She remembered the way he'd race her to the far bank, tongue lolling, tail a black and tan blur. She remembered the comfort of his presence after the accident, how she'd pressed her face into his fur to muffle her sobs, and how he'd stayed, silent and unyielding, through every heartbreak. "You always found me here," she murmured, smiling through tears. Even when I tried to hide, Scout's tail twitched, and he lifted his head to press his nose against her palm. His breath came slower now, a gentle ebb and flow. The day faded into dusk, the sky streaked with lavender and rose. Claire watched the stars blink awake, one by one, and told Scout stories of their adventures. The mischief, the triumphs, the quiet, sacred moments they'd shared. She spoke to him as if he were listening to every word, as if, in his own way, he understood every syllable. When the air turned chilly, she wrapped him close in her jacket, carrying him back to the car. She drove home in silence, the world soft around the edges. Back at the house, she built a small fire in the fireplace, its light flickering warmly across the room. Scout curled beside her, his head in her lap, eyes barely open. That night, Claire didn't sleep. She lay on the rug, one hand on Scout's side, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. She drifted in and out of memories, half dreaming of sunlit fields and stormy nights, of laughter echoing down empty halls. The pain of coming loss pressed on her chest, but she met it with quiet courage. She'd already said so many goodbyes. She would not let this one be stolen by fear. In the small hours before dawn, Scout stirred. His eyes opened, seeking Claire's. She leaned down, pressing her forehead to his. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice a soft anchor in the silence. "I'm right here. You're safe." Scout's breathing grew slower, his body relaxing fully into her embrace. As the first pale light crept through the window, he let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of release, of surrender. His tail thumped one last time, and his gaze held hers, gentle and steady. With the sunrise spilling gold across the room, Scout slipped away. Peaceful, loved, his journey complete. Claire felt the exact moment his spirit departed, felt the hush settle over the house. She pressed her lips to his fur, tears falling freely, her grief sharp and clean, but filled with gratitude. For a long while, she stayed beside him, honoring every moment they'd shared. She spoke to him of love that doesn't end, of the ways he'd saved her over and over again, of the hope he'd carried through every storm. When she finally rose, the world outside was bright and new, a day Scout would never see, but one shaped forever by his presence. Claire buried Scout beneath the willow tree by the lake, where the sun touched the earth and the water sang. She planted wildflowers and smoothed the earth, promising that his story would live on in every heart he touched. As she walked back to the house, she felt his spirit at her side, a faithful shadow, a whisper of loyalty. The grief would linger, she knew, but so would the love. Scout had waited. Now, Claire understood. Sometimes, healing means letting go, but never forgetting. The first days after Scout's passing moved like a quiet tide through Claire's life. Soft, persistent, forever changed. She felt his absence everywhere, in the hush of the house, in the sunlight streaming across the floor where he once slept, in the empty echo of her daily rituals. Yet, in that emptiness, something unexpected grew. A desire to build, to honor, to make the meaning of Scout's loyalty live on for others who needed it most. She found herself returning to the lake every morning, sitting by the willow where Scout rested beneath wildflowers. She'd talk to him, voice steady in the early mist, and let her memories drift across the water. It was during these quiet moments that an idea took root, gentle but insistent. The Whitmore house and land could become a sanctuary, a place where broken hearts and wounded spirits could find what she and Scout had shared: healing, connection, hope. The vision blossomed quickly. She sketched out plans in a battered notebook, remembering the children she'd seen in Marion, some of them orphaned or struggling, and the veterans she'd met in passing, silent and watchful. She thought of Donna and the other shelter workers, of the loneliness she'd felt as a child after the accident, how much she'd needed comfort and understanding. Scout's Place would offer that to others. She started with the house itself, clearing out the rooms that had gathered dust and sadness. Each space became a piece of the new dream. The living room transformed into a warm communal lounge, walls lined with photos of Scout and other rescued dogs. Her father's old study became a reading nook stocked with books about courage, loss, and the bond between people and animals. The backyard, once tangled with weeds, was mowed and seeded with wildflowers, and a new fence enclosed a space where dogs and children could run freely. Dana visited often, her hands and heart as steady as ever. Together, they scrubbed floors, painted walls, and patched up windows that hadn't opened in years. Dana brought friends from the shelter, volunteers who believed in the mission, who'd seen firsthand how a single dog could change a life. Marcus helped as well, carrying lumber, hauling trash, sometimes sitting on the porch steps with Claire in the late afternoons, both of them quietly mending what had once been broken between them. Word of Scout's Place spread quickly in Marion. At first there was curiosity, whispers about the old Whitmore house and its transformation. But soon, the whispers became excitement. Claire hosted an open house, inviting townspeople to walk the grounds, meet the animals, and share stories of their own losses and healing. The response overwhelmed her. Families brought their children, local teachers volunteered to lead after-school art classes, and a group of veterans offered to help build a dock by the lake, creating a space for fishing and quiet reflection. The first children arrived in late October, their eyes wide, their laughter hesitant but real. Claire showed them the gardens, the sunny rooms, the portraits of Scout, his wise eyes and steadfast posture watching over them all. Some children clung to new rescue dogs, hugging them tightly, finding solace in their gentle warmth. Others found a place in the kitchen, baking cookies or learning to make simple meals. Veterans, too, gravitated toward the quiet spaces, reading, walking the trails, sometimes just sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and a rescued dog at their feet. The most profound healing happened in the small moments. A child whispering secrets to a dog, a teen lost in grief, teaching a rescue to fetch, a veteran, silent for months, breaking into laughter as a puppy clambered into his lap. Claire saw Scout's legacy in every wagging tail, every smile, every act of kindness that rippled through the house and grounds. She worked hard to make the place sustainable, organizing fundraisers, speaking at town meetings, applying for grants. Donations trickled in, some from neighbors, others from strangers who'd heard the story and wanted to help. Claire was tireless, but she never lost sight of what mattered most, the mission to make every soul who arrived at Scout's Place feel safe, valued, and understood. The house filled with life. Holidays were celebrated with laughter and shared meals. Birthdays marked with homemade cakes and dog-shaped balloons. Children learned to care for animals, plant gardens, mend fences. Adults rediscovered joy in service and companionship. Scout's Place became a living testament to resilience, a place where healing was not a miracle, but a shared journey. Claire found her own peace growing alongside the project. Each night, she'd walk down to the willow tree, sitting quietly and telling Scout about the day's triumphs and troubles. Sometimes she'd see a flash of movement in the dusk, a dog chasing fireflies, a child running with open arms, and she'd feel Scout's spirit close, like a gentle warmth at her side. She kept his collar in a place of honor in the entryway, beside a framed photograph of the two of them by the lake. It was a reminder that loyalty endures, that the pain of loss can give rise to hope, and that one dog's patience had changed not only her world, but the lives of so many others. Scout's Place wasn't just a shelter or a retreat, it was a promise, a legacy born from heartbreak, grown into something beautiful, lasting, and alive. The first frost touched the fields behind Scout's Place, dusting the grass with silver and turning the lake into a shimmering mirror at sunrise. The air was sharp, bright with possibility, and each breath Claire took felt lighter than the last. Winter had always seemed a season for endings, but this year it felt more like a beginning. On a brisk Saturday morning, Claire stood in the sunlit entryway of the house, her heart full as laughter echoed down the halls. Children darted past, boots squeaking, their arms full of scarves and mittens. In the backyard, a group of volunteers built birdhouses, guided by a pair of retired teachers and a patient golden retriever who watched every movement with mild curiosity. Veterans swapped stories on the porch, sipping cocoa and petting rescue dogs that sprawled at their feet. The walls of Scout's Place vibrated with new life, but Claire made sure there was space for quiet and memory too. In the corner of the front room stood a small table, Scout's table. On it rested his old collar, a faded photograph, and a jar where visitors could leave notes, wishes, prayers, memories, or thanks. Each slip of paper was a testament to the way one dog, loyal beyond reason, had changed countless lives. That afternoon, Claire led a new visitor through the house, a young woman named Emily, who'd come from 2 counties away with her nervous son and a rescued mutt she'd found wandering a back road. Emily's voice shook as she told her story. The struggles with loss, the loneliness, the hope that maybe here something would change. Claire smiled gently. She'd heard these stories before, in 100 variations. Every one was different, yet everyone was the same. She knelt beside Emily's son, offering her hand to the trembling dog. The pup hesitated, then wagged his tail and pressed into her touch. "You're safe here," Claire said, her words soft but certain. "Everyone is welcome, no matter what they've lost or how far they've come." As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and lavender, Claire gathered everyone by the fireplace for the nightly ritual. Some days they shared stories. Other nights, they simply let the fire crackle and the dogs snore at their feet. Tonight, Claire held Scout's collar, the leather worn smooth, the tag shining in the flickering light. She cleared her throat and spoke, not just to the group before her, but to the spirit of Scout she felt everywhere, in the warmth, in the laughter, in the hope that had found a home here at last. "Scout waited for me," she began, her voice steady. He waited through storms, through years of silence, through every heartbreak. He never gave up. He never stopped believing I'd come back for him. No. She looked around, meeting every pair of eyes in the circle. That's what love does. It waits, it forgives, it holds on even when things seem impossible. This place, Scout's Place, was built on that kind of love. And every time we help someone find hope, every time we rescue a dog or heal a wound, we carry Scout's legacy forward. She paused. The room hushed except for the gentle rhythm of breathing and the snap of the fire. I want you all to remember, loyalty outlives time. Some souls wait in the rain, knowing one day we'll find our way home. Healing takes patience, and it takes each other. No one heals alone. Not here. A quiet sob broke the silence. Emily's son hugged his dog tight, and one of the veterans reached over to squeeze Claire's hand. Even Marcus, standing near the back, blinked away tears, the lines of grief on his face softened by pride. As the gathering ended, Claire stood and crossed the room to a crate tucked in the corner. From inside, a young shepherd mix bounded out, ears too big, eyes bright with curiosity and trust. Claire knelt and clipped Scout's old collar gently around the pup's neck. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The children cheered, the volunteers smiled, and Claire felt a wave of gratitude so strong it brought her to her knees. She hugged the dog close, whispering, "You're home now? You'll help us carry the torch?" Outside, the world was quiet, the first stars pricking the sky above Scout's willow. Claire stepped onto the porch, watching her guests settle in for the night, their faces illuminated by porch lights and laughter. The peace she'd sought for so long finally felt real, a living, breathing gift, passed on from a dog who had never given up. In her heart, she thanked Scout for his patience, for his faith, and for the second chance he'd given her, and so many others. She knew his spirit would always walk these grounds, as long as there were those who believed in love, in loyalty, in the power of waiting for the ones who need us most. Before heading back inside, Claire turned to the camera by the door. A simple device for recording the stories and lessons of Scout's Place to share with the world. She smiled into the lens, her eyes shining. "If this story touched you," she said, voice warm and inviting, "please like and subscribe to our channel. Every follow, every share, every act of kindness helps us keep Scout's Place open for those who need it most. Support animal rescue, support each other, and remember, sometimes all it takes is one act of loyalty to change everything." As the video ended, so did the day. But in Marion, and wherever Scout's story traveled, new beginnings waited in every heart.